Lieutenant George Strauss, United States Navy Medical Department.
I remember when I arrived on the Western Front for the Second Battle of Mons in 1918. I was a medic. My job was not to fight the Germans, but to wage war on wounds. Many of my soldiers died with me helpless to save them on the battlefield, or back in the field hospital. The greatest killer in that great war was shock, where the blood circulation almost ceases due to extreme blood loss. The only solution that would have saved my men was blood transfusions. But this type of work was highly impractical in the hellish battlefields in which we fought. Even though refrigerated, the human blood begins to lose needed characteristics after 10 days or so. Without refrigeration, spoilage is a matter of hours. Also, each man has a different blood type, and it was impossible for us to carry enough blood of the correct type to administer to each man. Corporal Ward B. Scripture, Medical Assistant, United States Army, May 1918.
As I campaigned through St. Maurice, France, I treated many of my fellow soldiers to the best of my ability, as I spent months in the repulsive trenches. Infections plagued us, as they often set in just a short time after the wound was suffered, while the soldiers still lay on the battlefield. We had antiseptics, but I saw many a wounded man lying in the deep and narrow trenches, still covered by his muddy clothes, his own hands and those of his comrades grimed with mud. It became evident to me that to apply antiseptics under these conditions was worse than useless. Even if the soldier made it back to the field hospital, most antiseptics were still ineffective against bacteria, and more often killed the healthy tissue surrounding them than the septic bacteria inside. But that was not the worst of it. Many times when infection set in on the men, gas gangrene developed, a quick-moving, painful infection that eats the body's tissues alive, and, if infected limbs are not amputated in time, slowly leads to a horrible death. Venereal diseases such as syphilis and gonorrhea raged through our ranks as well, with no good cure. 1/10 of our men were infected with these diseases, and they filled our already packed field hospital. These awful scourges took a significant amount away from our daily fighting force, and with no good treatment, more became sick every day. Good morning, New York. Time to get your papers on this great day, October 24th, 1942. Answers to the war's greatest killers. Read all about it.
I'll take one, my good sir. In 1918, the answer to the blood transfusion problem had been suggested by a British Army doctor, Captain Gordon R. Ward, who pointed out that death from hemorrhage is due to the loss of fluid from the bloodstream. He suggested that this loss be made up by injecting plasma. In April 1941, the first package of dried human blood plasma was ready for market, a yellowish powder that could be made ready by just mixing with sterile water. Blood plasma has two huge advantages over whole blood for our troops. It does not need to be typed, and it can be stored much more easily, for much longer periods of time.
1 pint of blood makes 1 pint of plasma. 4 pints of plasma may mean the difference between life and death. The need is for just 1 pint of blood from 2.5 million Americans who are willing to shed it painlessly and safely for their country. Read all about it now.
Ah, my humble abode.
Thanks for tuning into NBC. Now we take you to Studio 4 with updates on the new life-saving sulfur drugs. The following program is brought to you by Wyeth American Home Products, lead contributor to the wartime drug supply. Without any real understanding of how sulfur drugs overcome infections, doctors have been freely using them, ever since Dr. Gerard de Mag of Germany discovered Prontosil, forerunner of sulfanilamide, in 1918. Great confidence has been placed in these drugs as a means of controlling infections in war wounds. Each medic is equipped with packets of sulfanilamide powder that can be administered on wounds on the battlefield to prevent the onset of infection. Visit the fighting armies of China, the South Sea Islands, North Africa, and what do you find? The sulfur drugs are at work, curing dysentery, preventing gas gangrene, and curbing ailments that were once more dangerous than bullets. The whole group of infectious diseases has been conquered in one swift stroke.
I just love this medical jargon.
Alexander Fleming, 1929, scientific journal on his discovery of penicillin.
A number of bacterial culture plates were set aside on the laboratory bench and examined from time to time. It was noticed that around a spot of mold, all the bacteria colonies had died. When investigated, it was found that the mold produces a powerful antibacterial substance called penicillin. Penicillin is non-toxic to animals in enormous doses and is non-irritant. It is suggested that penicillin may be an efficient antiseptic for application to or injection into areas infected with penicillin-sensitive microbes. Dr. Howard Floyd, 1939.
Dear Mr. Fleming, Dr. Ernest Chain and I have started the first serious research on your new drug, penicillin, and we are investigating its medical uses. Tests show that penicillin is highly effective on infections that sulfa drugs cannot even touch. 10 cases of sulfur-resistant gonorrhea have been treated with quite dramatic results, being completely cleared of all bacteria in just 2 days.
This drug may become the most important drug of the war and one of the most important medical discoveries of all time. Major General Albert W. Kenner, Chief Medical Officer of General Eisenhower's staff, November 15, 1944.
The rate of death from combat wounds in this war has been reduced to little more than half the rate it was in World War I. In the First World War, 60% of battle casualties developed an infection. In this war, the rate is less than 10%. Pharmacist mate Ray Crowder, United States Marine Corps.
I remember when my friend went into shock from a gushing wound at the Battle of the Bulge on December 20, 1944. There was only one thing to do, and that was to give him plasma right in the foxhole where he lay. I used the light of a match to tie a tourniquet and locate a vein to inject the plasma. I waited a couple of minutes, and I checked his arm to see if a bulge had formed. It was perfect, and shortly afterwards he began to revive. I had to leave him to treat other men, but I found him in the field hospital the next day, sitting up and eating a bowl of ice cream. Alan Ramsey, United States Air Force, 1945.
I was on a medical evacuation mission, and the corpsmen were bringing in the injured men in droves, and they were dirty. Iwo Jima was all black sand and dust, and when the propellers kicked it all up, the wounded would be bandaged with that dust in their dressings. So when I got them, I sprinkled them with sulfa powder and re-bandaged their wounds. For the last 2 years, I have been pouring sulfa powder and bandaging wounds. We had little tin cans that looked just like salt shakers, and we would use them with a mixture of sulfanilamide and, I'm sure, penicillin. It was this mixture that we used that saved many a limb and kept infections down almost zero. They are both miracle drugs, and of course, we also gave penicillin intravenously. John Kenner, United States Army, 1945.
It is my personal opinion that the level of professional care is very high, certainly higher than it was in the last war. The low incidence of serious infection was striking and must be related to the new drugs now employed. The incidence of amputation seemed happily low. The incidence of gas gangrene much lower than was present in the Great War. Penicillin is an eagerly sought life-saving drug and has revolutionized our entire program for the treatment of gonorrhea and syphilis. In no month of the war was the venereal rate as high as the lowest monthly rate for the last war. It is my personal opinion that the improvements made in medical treatment in the time between World War I and World War II have opened a new doorway in science and will lead to national blood banking systems,
antibiotic drugs and research,
sterile and stabilized surgery,
and much more
in the years to come.